My wife had a packed suitcase for a trip the following Tuesday, and she hadn't said a word about going anywhere. I found it because she asked me to unload groceries from her trunk. Under 2 bags of food and a package of paper towels sat an older gray hard-shell suitcase. I didn't recognize it. When I lifted it, something shifted inside. A printed baggage-style tag hung from a handle. Janice Marlowe. Dayton. Next Tuesday's date. Below that was a group reference number. Janice came through the garage carrying milk. Are you going somewhere Tuesday? She stopped. No. Why? Just asking. She gave me a puzzled look, then went inside. I hadn't shown her the tag. I carried the groceries in, but left the suitcase exactly where it was. Before closing the trunk, I noticed something tied around its handle. A narrow strip of faded yellow fabric, knotted twice. It looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. That evening, I checked the trunk while taking out the recycling. The suitcase was gone. Janice was making coffee. I waited for her to mention it. She didn't. Everything okay? She asked. Fine. The next morning, I found the suitcase standing behind coats in the hall closet. The tag was still attached. Dayton, Tuesday. Janice Marlowe. She'd moved a packed suitcase from her trunk into our house after telling me she wasn't going anywhere, and she hadn't said one word about it. I'm Curtis Marlowe. I'm 67. Janice is 63. We've been married 35 years and live in Evansville, Indiana. I spent most of my career installing and servicing commercial refrigeration equipment. Janice worked in payroll for a regional food distributor before retiring last year. I've never been good at letting people do things for me. Last winter, our neighbor offered to bring our trash cans up after an ice storm. I've got it, I said. Janice watched through the window as I shuffled down the driveway in boots. When I came back, she said, accepting help doesn't make the trash cans legally his. I like doing things myself. I've noticed. 2 days after I found the suitcase, Janice asked me to bring her reading glasses from the desk in our spare room. They were sitting on a folder. When I picked them up, a stiff paper tag underneath slid onto the floor. It looked almost identical to the one on the suitcase. Curtis Marlowe. Dayton. Same Tuesday. Same group reference number. For about 5 seconds, the whole thing became simple. Janice had planned something for both of us. Maybe a surprise. Then I saw the line beneath my name. Participant, hold. Janice's tag hadn't said that. I heard her call from the kitchen. Did you find them? Yeah. I carried her glasses downstairs. She thanked me and put them on. I didn't mention the second tag, but now neither explanation worked. If Janice was secretly leaving, why was my name connected to the same destination? And if we were both going, why was I on hold? Saturday morning, Janice said she was taking some old donation things to the Vanderburg Heritage Center. That wasn't unusual. She'd volunteered there a few times since retiring. What was unusual was a suitcase. She carried it to her car. I didn't follow her. I was already scheduled to meet a former co-worker for coffee 2 blocks from the center. Afterward, I drove past on my way home. Janice's car was outside. So were several people unloading luggage. Not modern rolling bags. Old suitcases, a garment case, a square train case. One woman carried a battered overnight bag covered with faded stickers. Nobody looked like they were going anywhere. Through the center's glass entrance, I saw volunteers putting temporary tags on the luggage and photographing it against a plain backdrop. Then I saw Janice. She was standing beside a woman around our age at a long table. My wife's suitcase was open. There were no clothes inside. There was a folded highway map, several old paper luggage labels, a bus timetable, and a red canvas toiletry pouch. I knew that pouch. I bought it at a drugstore when I was 29 because the zipper on my old one had broken. My initials were written inside it in black marker. I hadn't seen it in more than 30 years. The woman lifted it from the suitcase. Janice said something, then pointed toward the faded yellow strip tied around the handle. I drove home. When Janice returned, she put the suitcase back in the hall closet. At dinner, she talked about a sale on coffee and asked whether I'd remembered to call the plumber. Afterward, I went upstairs, took my paper tag from the desk, and brought it down. I placed it beside her coffee cup. "What is this?" Janice stared at my name. Then she looked at me. "I was going to tell you Monday. Try Saturday." Janice sat down. "There isn't a trip." I pointed at Dayton. "Then what's that?" "The destination isn't current." She explained that the Heritage Center was building a temporary oral history exhibit about families from southern Indiana who had planned or completed job-related moves during the late 1980s and early 1990s. The old luggage was part of the project. Participants filled suitcases with ordinary objects connected to those moves. Dayton wasn't where Janice was going Tuesday. It was where we had planned to go 36 years ago. The tags had been printed to resemble routing labels for the intake process. Janice's name was on the suitcase because she'd been the initial contact and brought in the objects. I leaned back. So Tuesday, recording appointments. Here in Evansville. For the first time since opening her trunk, the picture I'd built in my head fell apart. There was no airport, no secret departure, no other life waiting in Ohio. Then I tapped my tag. "Why is my name on one?" Janice didn't answer immediately. "Because the story they're recording isn't mine." She looked directly at me. "It's yours." I laughed. "I didn't go anywhere." "I know." "Then what's the story?" "The center has something you haven't heard." "What?" "An old recording." I stared at her. "Of who?" "You." 36 years earlier, I'd been packed for Dayton. I'd accepted a job there. I'd told everybody we were leaving. Then my family needed me, and I canceled the move. At least, that was how I'd remembered it for most of my adult life. In 1990, I worked on refrigeration systems for grocery stores and food warehouses. A company in Dayton offered me a better position, installing industrial equipment. More travel, better pay, better advancement. I accepted. Janice and I weren't married yet, but we'd already decided she'd follow once I found us an apartment. I bought road maps, had the car serviced, packed that red toiletry pouch. The gray suitcase had belonged to Janice's mother. The yellow strip came from an old kitchen curtain. Janice tied it around the handle, so we'd recognize the ordinary gray suitcase during the move. Then my father had to leave the apartment provided through his factory after the plant reduced operations. He wasn't helpless. My aunt had offered him her spare room outside Terre Haute until he found another place. But he hated that idea. I told Dayton I wasn't coming. I stayed in Evansville and helped Dad find a small rental. Janice and I married the following spring. Eventually, I moved into better refrigeration work here. Whenever the Dayton job came up, I told the same story. My dad needed help. The timing was bad. Janice never corrected me. At the kitchen table, I asked why the Heritage Center cared about a job I didn't take. Because the relocation office interviewed employees who declined transfers and placement offers. I never did an interview. You did? No. They have the tape, Curtis. I looked toward the hall closet. The red pouch had been packed for a journey that never happened, so had that suitcase. What did I say? Janice folded her hands. I think you should hear it from yourself. The following afternoon, we went to the Heritage Center. The archivist explained that a collection of employment relocation materials had been donated years earlier. Most of it sat uncatalogued until a recent local migration project. Among the materials were cassette interviews. Mine lasted less than 4 minutes. I agreed to hear one excerpt. Then I heard my own voice at 29. Thinner, faster, slightly irritated. A woman asked why I declined the Dayton position. Young me said, "My dad's situation gave me the reason, I guess. But if I'm being straight, I was relieved." A pause. Then my voice again. I kept telling everybody I want a fresh start. When it got real, I wasn't sure I wanted to start over at all. "That'll do," I said. The archivist stopped it. I remembered worrying about Dad and finding him an apartment. I hadn't remembered how relieved I'd been to have another reason to stay. Janice and I sat in the car afterward. "You knew I was unsure?" "I knew you were unsure. I didn't know you'd said that on tape." Why didn't you tell me when they contacted you? The center couldn't reach you from the old information. They found me because I'd volunteered there. That isn't what I asked. She looked down. I knew if I said they wanted to study a decision you made 36 years ago, you'd say no before you saw any of it. So you packed my things. I wanted you to see what they were asking first. And when I asked if you're traveling Tuesday, I wanted 5 more days before you said no. So you lied. Yes. Nothing had been approved for public use. The recording couldn't be included without my permission. My tag said hold because that permission hadn't been given. Janice hadn't volunteered my voice. She'd only gathered the objects. I was still angry. I need time. Take it. She didn't bring it up again. I didn't agree to anything that week. The suitcase stayed in the hall closet. Several days later, I called the Heritage Center myself. I agreed to one short new interview. Before we started, I told the archivist, if you use the old recording, use both. Both? What I said then and what I'm saying now. She nodded. That was enough. 2 weeks later, Janice and I brought the suitcase back for final exhibit preparation. The center had kept it small. Inside was a folded road map, my red canvas toiletry pouch, and a paper route guide. The faded yellow fabric was still knotted around the handle. Janice touched it. My mother's kitchen curtain. I remember now. You complained it looked ridiculous. It did. She smiled. A staff member removed Janice's temporary intake tag. Mine was still attached. Curtis Marlowe. Dayton. Participant. Hold. The staff member held out her hand. Want to take that one off too? No. There was a black pen on the table. I picked it up. Janice watched but didn't say anything. I drew one line through hold. Then I closed the old gray suitcase. The latch didn't catch. I pressed it again. Click.